Stephanie will be doing another talk on her travels to the Galapagos Islands. So if you have not RSVP'd for that one, it is Thursday at 1. We still do have a couple of spots open. And I can tell you from the few pictures I've seen, I am very excited. Also, just a reminder, we are giving these talks absolutely free of charge. If you are able, we appreciate a donation in any amount. You can log on to wildcarecapecod.org, and there's a donate now button right at the top, and every dollar counts, especially this time of year because we are in baby season. And with a reminder that it is baby season, we are holding a virtual baby shower. You will see the invitation for that, but it is Saturday, the 27th of June, and we'll be rolling out information for that at the end of this week. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to our Executive Director, Stephanie Ellis.
Yay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me. Rebecca, can you hear me? Okay, and we still have people signing in. I'm just going to give it a few more moments because when I share my screen, I won't be able to see who is in the waiting room. We currently have 25 people, Rebecca.
Okay. I think there might be 2 more.
Okay.
I just had 2 folks email me, so I think there might be.
Okay, I will go ahead and share my screen. Okay, I think we're good. Okay, great. And Rebecca, you can see the screen? Okay, wonderful. Thank you all for joining me. This is one of my most favorite topics. And obviously, I've dedicated my life to caring about wildlife. And so today I'm going to talk about why wildlife matters and also why rehab matters. And at the end, I'll provide you with some tips on how you can coexist with our wild neighbors. I'm not sure who's with us today, but I noticed last time that we had people from other countries and other states. So I do have a few slides about WildCare and what we do. And so WildCare is a nonprofit wildlife rehabilitation center. We're located in Eastham on Cape Cod. And our mission is to treat sick, injured, and orphaned wild animals for release back into the wild. So our goal is to get them back out there capable of breeding and independent survival. We treat over 1,800 animals per year, and I have a staff of 8 and over 200 volunteers. And so if this presentation is exciting to you and you would like to volunteer, I recommend that you check out our website, wildcarecapecod.org, and click on volunteer, and that will show you our current volunteer opportunities. So WildCare also does a lot of education and outreach, and we have an emergency helpline which helps us to do this. So this is a helpline where you can call us between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. 365 days per year if you have an animal in distress or an animal-human conflict. And I like to tell people that this hotline provides live counseling for your animal dilemmas, not for your personal dilemmas. Specifically for wildlife. But you can see we received almost 10,000, oops, I'm missing a 0 on there for some reason, almost 10,000 phone calls last year. And so that to me is reason alone. It shows the need for an organization like ours on Cape Cod. By the way, this is a red-throated loon who was released. So this is our facility. It's the big yellow farmhouse located on the Orleans Rotary on the Eastham side. And you can see here, if you can see my cursor, this is the Orleans Rotary. This is heading into Eastham. So you can look at us there and wave to the big yellow house. We're doing great work in those buildings. And I like to point out this giant building that I believe NASA can probably see from the moon. It's huge. That is our large raptor aviary. And that building is so important to the work that we do. The reason it's so important is there's actually 3 separate chambers within, excuse me, 4 separate chambers within this building. So there's an outer chamber that forms a continuous loop, and then 2 small chambers and 1 large chamber. And the reason that's so important is birds like this red-tailed hawk here, if he's in the outer chamber, he can actually fly a continuous loop, which is much more true to life, right? For getting an animal conditioned to get ready back into the wild. We can fly them, and I call it the raptor treadmill, because we can make them do laps around this treadmill, so to speak, and make sure that they're in perfect body condition to be released. We also have state-of-the-art Seabird therapy pools. I refer to this as the day spa for wildlife. We have these hot and cold therapy pools. We can make them saline or freshwater. And something that most people don't know is that birds are not magically waterproof. It's something they have to actively do. They have a gland on their rump, which secretes fatty acids and lipids, oils that they then wipe on their feathers to waterproof them. And so if birds are sick, like these were 2 common eider, they're a type of sea duck. When birds are sick, it's much like people. When we're sick, we might not get out of bed, we won't comb our hair, we don't bathe. Same with birds. If they're sick or injured, they're not preening, and so they're not actively waterproofing themselves. So by putting them in the pools, this is like the closest to the natural environment we can provide them, and it stimulates them to start the preening process. It's really, really important. So why are animals brought to wild care? Primarily they're orphaned, injured, or diseased. You can see this is a herring gull with a wing injury, red-tailed hawk with foot injuries, and a brown pelican. And for those of you who are birders, you're saying, what the heck is a brown pelican doing on Cape Cod? Well, we do occasionally see them, usually storm-related, and it's usually juveniles, which this bird was. And this bird blew in with Hurricane Sandy back in November of 2012. The bird, we rehabilitated it. At that time, we did not have these amazing pools, so we were not set up to accommodate such a huge aquatic bird. But we rehabilitated him to the best of our ability and then shipped him to Florida to a wildlife sanctuary so he could finish out his rehab process. They specialized in pelicans. So he did not fly on his own. He flew on Delta Express to Florida. And just to let you know, so we are going into the height of the baby bird season, and we get hundreds of baby birds, especially songbirds, as you can see. And so we need volunteers every spring and summer to help us feed the baby birds. And that requires a 3-hour per week dedication to a 3-hour shift where all you do is feed the babies, feed and clean them. It's actually very, very rewarding and a very important program. Okay, so before we talk about why wildlife matters, I believe this is a really important slide. In 2019, we received 1,865 animals. And in 2000, let's see, you can see that this represents a large number of species, 121 different species in 2019, including 2 monarch butterflies, believe it or not. We were actually able to do a wing transplant on a monarch butterfly last year and release the monarch just in time for migration. Felt really good about that. Oops, I'm missing, for some reason I'm missing a slide. Oh no, it's here. Okay. So why wildlife matters. When you think about where we live, we are so incredibly blessed. People flock here, no pun intended, to see the nature around us. Air, land, and sea, we have incredible marine mammals, birds, migratory birds, resident birds. Here is a robin nest, the classic structure of a robin's nest and their classic blue eggs. And here is a coyote on an outer beach in Orleans. And I just love to remind people, you know, nature and the wildlife around us, there's so much intrinsic value that it brings to us. You know, people come here to escape and to see these things. But on the other side of it, we often take wildlife for granted. The squirrels in our backyard, you either love them or hate them, right? Because they're raiding your backyard bird feeders. But what we forget is all of these animals, whether we love them or not, they all play a really important role in the ecosystem. And everything is interconnected, which I will talk about in great detail. And I wrote a few notes here, just that we forget how much we depend on wildlife to maintain balance in the natural world, and how much our wild neighbors depend on us to protect and preserve them. Instead, I feel like instead of appreciating wildlife, we often get in their way. And here's a slide which directly represents that. So in 2018, we received 1,857 animals into wild care. And you can see 42.54% of these animals were brought to us because they were negatively impacted by people. And it says known impact, meaning you brought a baby bird to the door because you cut down the tree and didn't know there was a nest. Or your cat brought the baby squirrel to your door. So we know there was human interaction. So think about it. Almost 50% of the animals that we see at a small wildlife hospital were impacted by people. And that doesn't count for the unknown. I'm sure this number is actually much greater. And so I want to point out the top 3 reasons why we receive animals. Number 1 is cat and dog attack, causing orphans. Number 2 is hit by vehicle or equipment. Cars run over by cars, hit by lawnmowers, wood chippers. We do see a lot of destruction from equipment. And then number 3 is nest and habitat disturbed. So landscaping, construction, tree removal, pruning. And by the way, this presentation, it's not going to be all downers. At the end, I'm going to give you some useful tips on how you can prevent these things and how we can coexist with wildlife. But I just wanted to point that out because it's really important. So I've been doing this work now for, I think, 18 years. I kept saying 15 years, but that was for like 3 years I've been saying that. So I think it's 18 years. And I sometimes hear this sentence, and it really troubles me. I hear people say that they saw an animal. For example, they saw a squirrel on the side of the road and they thought, oh, I'm just going to leave it there. I'm going to let nature take its course. Well, look at this bird. So this is a razorbill. It's a type of seabird, and he is laying on the beach. To me, from the trained eye, there are many things wrong with this photo. But someone might pass it by and say, oh, he's resting, or maybe he doesn't feel well. Let's let nature take its course. Well, when I look at this bird, I first think this is a razorbill. They're only here in the winter. They are what we call a pelagic species, which means they spend their entire life offshore. They only go to land to breed. And breeding means Arctic Circle and Greenland, Iceland. So you can imagine they do a winter here, but they winter offshore. So imagine in the winter, I'm walking on the beach and I see this. First of all, he doesn't belong beached. But also when I look at him carefully, I don't know if you guys can see that he's all dark in the back, and that's because he had oil on him. And so now I could say, sure, let's let nature take its course, but what part of oil is nature? It's not. And because there's so much human impact that we see, I feel as though it's our responsibility to rectify, take these animals in, care for them, rectify, and also educate about what we're seeing and what can be done. So this little bird, I don't think that he survived. But what happened was, as soon as we see this, the photo was by Andrea Spence, and she brought him in, and we contact the Coast Guard and all the officials, and of course they're concerned. And this bird is a sentinel for something that's happening in the environment. So they immediately started looking to find the source of the oil. And unfortunately, they could not find it. We did receive a few other birds who were mildly oiled, and we were able to rehabilitate a couple and get them out. But so we will talk about this more also, about how animals are the canaries in the coal mine, if you will. So let nature take its course. I say to people, what part of nature is this fish hook? What part of nature is this bullet in a squirrel? So I think very differently when I see animals. I wonder what's happened to them and how I can educate people to prevent these things in the future. This gull, the hook was surgically removed and the bird was released. I can't recall what happened with the squirrel, unfortunately. Okay, so another thing that I hear that makes blood vessels rupture in my head is, why do you take care of mice? Like, why do you take care of squirrels and rabbits? Who cares? They're everywhere. Mice are pests. And so what I usually tell people is our motto at WildCare is that every animal, every species, and then every individual has an important story to tell and a role to play in the environment. So these red squirrels, when they're not eating all the suet in your backyard, they're also really important forest regenerators, gray squirrels especially. Gray squirrels, they hide thousands of acorns in a season. And do you think that they can remember where they've hidden all those acorns? No, they're not that smart. They're cute, but they're not that smart. They actually can recall from smell and memory, spatial memory, many of the acorns, but others are stolen. Acorns are left behind. My point is that there's your new crop of oak trees or maple trees, or whatever it is that they've buried or left behind in the future. So really important for regenerating plants. Same with mice. This is a white-footed mouse pup. And I know mice are so cute, right? Until they get into your silverware drawer and they're pooping in there. Then they're not so cute. But mice are also really important prey items for hawks, owls, foxes, coyotes. They also distribute, they are forest regenerators. They are planting seeds. They form caches, and they also poop out and leave behind seed material. So all of these guys are important for so many different reasons. But I also like to remind people when they say to me, but they're everywhere, Cape Cod doesn't need more squirrels. I remind people to think about, oops, that's a little mouse pup that I'm caring for. 2.34 grams, which is less than a penny, by the way. He's doing well. His eyes just opened. So when people say, oh, squirrels are everywhere, we don't need more squirrels, here's what I like to remind people of. The passenger pigeon. And this is such a terribly sad story. But this bird, it is extinct. And this bird was so incredibly abundant in the mid to late 1800s that it was said, there are detailed accounts that the birds blackened the skies when they passed over. That's how many passenger pigeons there were. I actually wrote down some quotes. They were so numerous at one time that they were reported as countless numbers. And in the 18th century, Mr. Mather saw a flock that was a mile wide and took hours to pass. Another observer in Kentucky noted that when a flock of passenger pigeons flew overhead, it blocked out the sun for days. But what happened was deforestation. Colonists coming to the New World absolutely devastated their habitats and completely slaughtered them for food, for feathers. And when you think about it, in that time, you know, mid-1800s, they didn't have eBird, they didn't have this data collection or Migratory Bird Treaty Act. We didn't care, right? There's so many pigeons, they could never be extinct. Well, unfortunately, because of the mass slaughter of these birds, they did go extinct. And it was, I can never forget the year, I can never remember the year. The last known passenger pigeon, her name was Martha, and she was in the Cincinnati Zoo, and she died on September 1st, 1914, after the passenger pigeon's massive decline in 1870. So on that day in 1914, it marked the era of an extinction for this species. And I think the quote here at the bottom really sums up the point. The time to protect a species is while it is still common. So all of these animals we're getting in at WildCare, whether they're common or not, we are learning so much about the impacts they face in the wild, their behaviors, their habitats. It's all data that is collected and then shared so that management decisions can be made to help to preserve these populations or preserve their habitats. And so I think it's important also that humans do influence and jeopardize the environment of wildlife, and we can make a difference. That was a depressing slide. But I think there's no better point. And by the way, there is a wonderful book. It's a bit challenging to read, I find, but it's called Hope is the Thing with Feathers, A Personal Chronicle of Vanished Birds. And it details the lives and deaths of 6 extinct bird species. It's beautifully, beautifully written. It's just a hard read. Times are very different now. Thank God. We're much more aware, and social media helps that with the sharing of information. Okay, so the purpose of rehab. So I personally, why am I caring for a mouse pup that weighs as much as a penny? I personally just am a compassionate person, and I want that animal to survive. I want to give it a second chance. And also I want to rectify all of the destruction that humans cause in their lives. But there are also many other purposes of rehabilitation. So an example is this northern gannet mortality event that we saw a couple of years ago. So think about it, wildlife rehabbers, we're getting all these animals right from the ground, right? From beaches, from ballparks, from parking lots. And so we really we're the eyes and ears on the ground for understanding what impacts them in the wild. In 2017, we started receiving gannets, and depending on the season, 1 or 2 gannets, like that would be normal. But when you start receiving 5, 10, 20, that something's wrong. And here's where we start communicating with groups like USDA, USGS, the Forensic Wildlife Lab in Wisconsin, because animals are the canaries in the coal mine. We are seeing emerging diseases, mortality events, and so we are providing all of this information to the authorities so that they can make quick wildlife decisions, which can also impact people. Again, the canary in the coal mine thing. So these northern gannets, we took in 23 gannets. The birds were not in good shape. They were neurologic. No one knew what was wrong. We tried several different treatments, did not know what we were working with, and we were able to save 3. And I felt really good about those 3, given that we found out ultimately that the cause was a cyanobacterial outbreak. And so these birds were exposed to cyanobacteria, which causes neurological dysfunction and lesions on the brain, which is not treatable. But so just to back up, so we provided USGS with carcasses of birds who did not survive so that they could come to this ultimate conclusion of what was happening. Also, I have a lot of things on this slide here. So birds teach us, not just birds, but animals in general that we get in a rehab setting teach us about environmental impacts, environmental disasters, ecological disasters, the oiled razor bill I was talking about. Also teaches us about distribution of species, problem locations. When we have species that are protected, like the eastern box turtle, that's a species of special concern. We can look at, if mass wildlife says to us, where do all your eastern box turtles come from? What is the most predominant location in which they're hit by a car? That's data that's shared to then inform management to protect those species. Here's another example of how we are the eyes and the ears on the ground. So in 2018, Massachusetts saw something we've never seen before. There was an outbreak of the Newcastle's virus on Cape Cod and in southern Massachusetts. And this was really unfortunate because the birds are needed to be euthanized. There is not a treatment for this, and it's highly, highly contagious, and also to poultry. But the reason I'm showing you this slide is because wildcare, because of the number of birds that we collected and where they were found, where they were rescued, Mass Wildlife was able to really map out where this virus may have started from, where, you know, the distribution of this virus. And it proved to be really, really important, and will also help us to respond to events like this in the future. So I guess my point of showing you all this is, I know there are some people in the world that feel as though the dollars spent towards wildlife rehabilitation could best be spent elsewhere, but saving individual animals does not help or hinder a population. And I totally disagree, because every single animal we get provides us with information about what they are facing in the wild. And there are also some positive outcomes. There was a king eider discovered last year, 23 years after it had been cleaned in an oil spill, which is absolutely incredible. This was like the most amazing news. If you remember in 1996, Exxon Valdez in Alaska, quite possibly the worst oil spill that the world has ever experienced. This eider was heavily oiled and was washed, and just 23 years later was seen alive. You know, and this is what it's all about. The bird was banded, so they were able to re-identify that bird as an individual. And that makes my heart sing. This is what it's all about, is to get them back out into the wild and hopefully, you know, able to reproduce again. Of course, we don't know if he reproduced, but any bird that looks like that should definitely be reproducing, because I don't think you would have trouble finding a mate. And I don't know if you are all familiar with the One Health paradigm. I'm actually going to read you a definition. So One Health, this is a view held by CDC, and it's a concept recognizing that the health of people is directly connected to the health of animals in the environment. The CDC uses One Health by working with physicians, veterinarians, ecologists, etc., to monitor and control public health, and to learn how diseases are spread amongst people, animals, and the environment. And so, you know, when I say that loons in Massachusetts are dying because of lead poisoning, well, how are they getting that lead poisoning? Some of them are swallowing lead sinkers, lead jigs, lead fish hooks, lead shock. Many of them are also swallowing fish that have lead in their tissues. And so these fish are also fish that humans are consuming. So all of us, we are so interrelated. And I think that the point that really drives this home for me and for a lot of people is when I think about the coyote controversy that we've had on Cape Cod. A lot of people are fearful of coyotes and hate them and want them dead and want them out of their backyards. But as we kill the coyotes, we see this unhealthy balance of predators, prey animals. So unhealthy balance of rats, for example. And that's just one example of how everything gets out of balance. We can't just go off killing wildlife because everything is so deeply interrelated. There's a huge cause and effect. Okay, I think this is my last depressing slide. Maybe not. I also want you to know that even the deceased animals have value. You know, as a wildlife rehabilitator, we do see a lot of mortality. And it's because if you think about it, that razorbill, for example, a species I told you only comes to land to breed and breeding is in Iceland or Greenland or the Arctic Circle. So if you can walk up to that bird on the beach on Cape Cod, something's terribly wrong. So we often see the gravest of disease and injury. However, many of them are saved, and that's what makes this job all worth it. But I just want you to know that even the deceased animals have value. And this duck provides a perfect example. This beautiful duck came to us at Wildcare from Nantucket Sound, Chatham, around Harding's Beach. And you see this antenna sticking out of her back. So this is a telemetry device, which had been surgically inserted into her abdomen. So this duck came to us, it died within an hour, was in terrible shape, having trouble breathing. And so I knew that this telemetry device was important. You know, someone is doing a research on this bird. I wish she had lived, but she did not. And so what I did was I removed the device and I contacted the researcher. And this was very interesting. So I told him about the duck, and he told me that this was fascinating because they had tried 2 different telemetry devices with 2 different types of batteries in this species of long-tailed duck. And they had caught ducks off Nantucket Sound. And it was interesting because he had captured her in almost the exact same location as where she had been rescued. And what happened was she had traveled over 1,900 miles between Cape Cod to, is it pronounced Nunavut? I always say Nunavut, but I feel like it's probably Nunavut. It's a Canadian Arctic territory. So the duck had traveled over 1,900 miles. Then she stopped in the Bay of Fundy, Gulf of St. Lawrence, and Hudson Bay, excuse me, and came back. Then she departed Cape Cod on April 26th and arrived June 15th and lost signal. So basically she did 1 full cycle of going from Cape Cod to the Arctic to Cape Cod, and then she departed again from Cape Cod, but lost the signal. And so he never knew what happened to this bird. And what they're trying to find out is, where do they go? Do they go to the same place every winter? This is important for habitat protection. And so he lost the signal. He assumed perhaps she was deceased, and she was not. She returned to Cape Cod almost to the exact location, like I said, where she had been banded and had the transmitter inserted. So you can see this long journey, and he was thrilled. Again, he would have been more thrilled if the bird was living, but thrilled to know that this is indeed an important location for long-tailed ducks, or at least this long-tailed duck. And if you know anything about the species, I believe over 75% of their Atlantic population actually winter in Nantucket Sound. So it is, you know, that information again, and we are not a research group. Like, honestly, we participate when groups ask us because we have the information, but our goal is not research. Our goal is to care and to get animals back out into the wild. But that was important information. And my last slide about animals being deceased and having value is, I don't know if you're aware that in Massachusetts, in New England, we have 2 species of rabbits. Did you guys know that? The New England cottontail is the only native rabbit that we have here. The Eastern cottontail is not a native rabbit. It's a beloved rabbit, but it was introduced, I believe, in the late 1800s, early 1900s in Massachusetts, I believe. So anyway, New England cottontail, they're becoming decreasingly abundant, and it's because of loss of habitat, and also they've been outcompeted by Eastern cottontail. So we're working with Mass Wildlife. Any of the rabbits that we rehabilitate that do not survive, Mass Wildlife is taking those specimens, doing a post-mortem and determining if they are New England cottontail, because it's very difficult to discern the 2 rabbits, even, even if you have it in your hand visually. So they actually have to look at the skulls of these rabbits. And why this is important, I'm happy to provide specimens. We try our best, but some animals don't survive. And this information will help them to understand where the rabbits are on Cape Cod, New England cottontail, and they don't have much data about New England cottontail on the outer Cape. So this could be information for habitat protection to save that species. It's so, so important. Our work is so multifaceted. It's very, very important. It is helping individuals and it's helping populations. So this is just an example of all the groups that we work with to provide data on living and deceased animals. Okay, so here's some feel-good stories about why rehab's important. So you may have seen in the news last summer that WildCare rehabilitated 2 bald eagles and released them. And this was just amazing. Remember that large aviary I showed you? Thank God we have that, because it actually meets the minimum standard size requirements for the state for housing bald eagles. So we needed to utilize that building. But why this is so special, I feel, is if you know the bald eagle story in New England, they were nearly extirpated. Extirpated means local extinction. Nearly extirpated in the 70s because of the use of DDT, the DDT pesticide. And so DDT was banned in the 70s, and there were massive recovery efforts, captive breeding to help these birds. And you probably have seen in the news that eagles are successfully nesting for the first time in over 100 years on Cape Cod. And so they're no longer, they are now more abundant, but I feel so good about, this was a bird that was looking at local extinction, and for us to have rehabilitated 2 more youngsters and get them out the door is really, really important. And here's another one. This is a great story. So this is a common murre, another species that we only see here in the winter. They winter offshore here, and they breed, I want to say Arctic Circle. Actually, they breed from Maine north on rocky islands and cliffs. But this bird had a wound over his thigh, and we rehabilitated him, perfect bird. The wound had been, surgically cleaned up, but unfortunately the feathers did not grow in that small location. And we were concerned, a bird that breeds from Maine to the Arctic, if it has one small area of compromised feathering, how is it going to survive? It's not going to be waterproof, and it's going to be in extremely cold temperatures. So we consulted with a lot of murre experts throughout the United States. There are murres on both coasts, and we decided the bird was not releasable. Now, in most cases, when animals are not releasable, they often have to be humanely euthanized. In this case, because the bird was literally otherwise perfect other than this small dilemma, we actually found a zoo, the Omaha Zoo. It's called the Murray Omaha Zoo and Aquarium. They wanted this bird because they have a seabird exhibit with murres, and all of their murres were captive bred. So they were really delighted to have a bird with wild genes who could potentially lay an egg if it was a female, or breed to help them to produce chicks, which would aid in species recovery in the event that common murres, were facing a crisis in their populations. So Murray flew out to Omaha, and I flew with him on a private jet, which was absolutely incredible. It was like an experience of a lifetime for me and the bird. A donor flew us on a jet because she thought that would be less stressful for the bird. Of course, I had to fly back on United Airlines while the birds all comfy at the Omaha Zoo. But so Murray, it's been 3 years now, I think 3 years since Murray's been there. Murray was DNA tested, and Murray is a female, which is great. She immediately paired with a male, but they are unpaired at the moment, and she has not laid an egg. But again, it's promising. They can live very long lives, and Murs are not suffering massive decline right now. But I think, again, the time to study and care for a species is while they're abundant, so they don't become extinct. I have, this is just another quick feel-good rehab story. A razorbill, and this razorbill was a perfect, except he was blind in one eye. He had an eye injury. We found that the National Aquarium in Baltimore was very interested in this bird, again, for the same reasons as the Omaha Zoo. All of the birds at the National Aquarium, except for one, I believe, were captive bred. Introducing wild genes into the population at the zoo is important. And so they took this razorbill and they named him Long John Silversides, LJS. And he immediately paired. I went and visited him last January. This is him missing. They actually removed the eye. It was useless, and they decided to remove the eye, and the bird's doing well. He paired with a bird named Sandy from Hurricane Sandy, and they are absolutely in love. And it is hoped that she will lay an egg. Again, species recovery in mind. And I think my last species recovery feel-good slide is Parker the plover. You all know piping plovers. They are a threatened, federally threatened species, federally endangered species, state threatened species. Parker came to us and could not be released due to a permanent wing injury that he had suffered as a chick. So he was not growing in flight feathers on one wing and would never fly. The New England Aquarium had an elderly piping plover, and they decided to add this plover into their exhibit. In this case, not for breeding reasons, but how best, to educate people about the importance of plovers than showing you a plover up close. Millions of people go through the aquarium every year and can see this species up close and learn about their important habitat. So Parker's doing really, really well at the zoo. Unfortunately, their elderly plover passed away. And so I was sad to hear that, but I'm glad that they have Parker. So we do a lot of educational outreach. It's so important. All this information I'm sharing with you, I try to share with everyone and teach people how to coexist with wildlife. Okay, so the end of my presentation is just giving you some tips now on how you can make a difference and how we can all help our wild neighbors. And this, by the way, is a little opossum joey. They're absolutely beautiful, and opossums are the only marsupial in North America, the only pouched mammal. And also opossums eat thousands of ticks in a summer season. And so they're really, really important. People think of them as vermin or rats. They're not rats. They're not even a rodent. They're marsupial. And they eat thousands of ticks in a season, and they're thought to actually significantly reduce the number of ticks that can potentially be carrying Lyme disease in your backyard and other tick-borne diseases. So the next time someone tells you that an opossum is like a trash rat, you should correct them. Tell them why they're not. We're going to go through these bullet points with slides. So something that you can do to save wildlife is to save a tree. Save a tree, save an owl. I like to tell people that no trees are ever really dead. Even if there aren't any mammals or birds living in them, there's probably thousands of insects living in them that other animals eat. I tell people to please reserve your tree felling and pruning for the fall, late fall, or winter months. This little owl right here, the #1 reason we receive orphaned owls is because people cut down a tree and did not know that there was a nest in it. So we really, unless you know the telltale signs of how to determine if there's a nest, we highly recommend that you reserve your tree felling for the late fall. And if you can leave snags, I know they're unsightly sometimes, but they're so important for wildlife. This slide is a little bit grim, but it's very important. Cats indoors, that's one simple way you can protect wildlife. For the safety of your cat and the safety of the wildlife. There are over 100 million free-roaming cats in the US. That's a pretty staggering number, and that accounts for house cats and feral cats. And cats are responsible for the death of over 2.4 billion birds annually in the US alone. If you can imagine, and they're believed that that's a gross underestimate. That's from looking at, cameras placed on cats' collars, remote cameras. Cats are known to be the #1 direct threat to birds in the US. So, we think about habitat destruction and everything else that birds are facing in the environment. And this is the #1 threat. So if you can, keep them in or build or buy a catio. Do you guys know what a catio is? It's an indoor-outdoor patio for your cats. And if you Google catio, there's a million designs that you can build, anything from $300 to $3,000. And it makes your cat feel like he's in the great outdoors, except he can't kill anything. And by the way, I am not anti-cat. I just prefer when you work every day and see the devastation caused by cats, you prefer that they're inside. The #1 reason we receive baby rabbits, which is right here. Actually, last year, the #1 reason for baby rabbits was dogs. Dogs digging up nests, but usually it's cats. Okay, just say no to rodenticides and glue traps. So rodenticides are very harmful, especially the anticoagulant rodenticides. So your rat and mouse poisons, anticoagulant means that it interferes with the blood's ability to clot. And so when you use these poisons, what happens to the rodent is they start bleeding out. Okay, so bleeding internally and then externally. They're debilitated, they go outside, they're disoriented, they're seeking water, and then Mr. Red-tailed hawk right here sees this easy prey and eats it. And so guess what happens to Mr. Red-tailed hawk? He's poisoned as well, secondary poisoning. We absolutely hate poisons. I am going to do a talk midsummer about alternatives to rodenticides because I think they are never the answer. This hawk, by the way, it took 30 days of vitamin K treatment and supportive care to get this bird back on its feet. It was so debilitated, and we were able to release him, which was wonderful. He was found slumped over in a road in Truro. This great horned owl also recovered from rodenticide poisoning. And what we see is when they come in, they're severely lethargic. We will see anemia because they're bleeding internally. We don't often or always see external bleeding. That's sort of the end stages, not good. But we see the anemia, emaciation, they're exhausted, and completely disoriented. So no rodenticides. I would say snap traps are far more humane than rodenticides. And also these glue traps are absolutely terrible. And the reason they're terrible is I personally think it's an inhumane way to destroy something is to let it get trapped on a sticky plate, and then suffer for hours, if not days. But also they trap the unintended. You can see here, this is a screech owl on a sticky trap. He probably saw a rodent wiggling on the trap or insects. And every year WildCare takes wrens, songbirds, frogs, snakes out of glue traps. I hate glue traps. They should be outlawed. I personally feel that. They are not the answer. Again, snap traps are far more humane. Okay, and then get the lead out. So we can all clean up our fishing debris and do not use lead products. They are in the oceans, they are in the waterways, and birds are ingesting them. Tufts had done a study, and I can't remember the year, but I think it was 2004, where Dr. Mark Pokris said they determined from looking at specimens, carcasses, that lead poisoning was killing our loon populations. And so we actually have a blood lead machine at WildCare, and there are some species where we just, as standard, we look at the levels of lead in their bloodstream. And so you might wonder, how are these birds getting lead poisoning? And it's because they're swallowing lead jigs, lead sinkers, lead hooks, lead shot at the bottom of waterways, but also lead bioaccumulation in the food that these birds are eating, which again goes back to the canary in the coal mine thing, right? So, you know, if the gannets are eating bass that have high levels of lead, we're also eating the bass. And so it's that one health paradigm. What affects them affects us. A nice thing you can do for turtles is help them across the road. If you see a turtle in the road, you can, if it's safe, help them cross to the other side. Do not move them to a new location, because most turtles have a very small territorial range. And for example, an eastern box turtle, they are not an aquatic species. So if I see an eastern box turtle and I decide to go put it in a pond in Norton, first of all, their home range is about a mile. So the turtle's gonna try, you know, for the rest of its life to try to get back to where it was found. But also, if I put it in a pond, eastern box turtles are not aquatic. They only sit in the water to drink, poop, cool off, and to ease botfly infestations. So please don't move them. I know you think it's kind, but it's not the right thing to do. The kindest thing is to move them to the side of the road in which they're headed. And see this big mama? She had a fracture in her shell here. Do you notice all these eggs? She had 99 eggs inside of her. Because what's happening is right now, turtles are either crossing the road to find mates or crossing the road to find a place to lay their eggs. We repaired her shell, and because turtles heal slowly relative to mammals and birds, we had her for an entire year. It took an entire year for that full healing of the shell. And she was released back into a location right near where she was found, and hopefully stayed out of the road. Another kind thing you can do for nature is to build or buy a nest box. And it's like one of the simplest and most enjoyable things you can do. And we have so many places here that sell either the materials or the boxes. Certainly Birdwatcher's General Store in Orleans, he's got everything. You just tell him what you want to attract, and he's got a nest box for it. But also if you go to Cornell's website, and I believe if you type in, it's not Nest Watch. If you go to Cornell's website and Google nest boxes, you can actually type in what you would like to attract and your zip code, and they will tell you if you can even attract that. You know, if you want to attract a toucan to your backyard in Orleans, well, it doesn't matter what kind of birdhouse you put up there, you are not going to be attracting toucans. So that site is very, very helpful. And I think this is my last slide. So the fishing debris, I already mentioned lead jigs and lead sinkers in the environment, also hooks and fishing line, extremely problematic for wildlife. We have been seeing an increase in fishing debris related injuries in the past few years. And so what are we doing about it? We decided to set up some receptacles in Chatham. This is our pilot town. We are so grateful to Chatham. And these receptacles are where people can trash their tackle. So if you're done fishing and you need to cut your line and you need some place to throw it, you can stick it in the receptacle. Or if you find derelict fishing gear on the beach, you can put it in the receptacle. And then we are collecting these materials once a week, sorting, cleaning, recycling, repurposing, or trashing appropriately. Okay, and so it's an exciting project because animals cannot digest plastic. I don't know where this came from, but people have said to me, can't the birds digest the fish hook? And I don't understand where people get this from. It makes me want to say, if you swallowed a fish hook, could you digest it? We can't, and neither can they. So this painted turtle had an ingested fish hook. It was surgically removed and the turtle was released. This gannet had this fishing lure embedded into his neck. It was removed and he was released. This laughing gull had a massive hook ingested, but also had a severe leg fracture. So unfortunately, this bird had to be humanely euthanized. And when you're fishing, if you hook a bird, do not cut the line. Often in early stages, we can remove the fishing hook surgically. It's when birds, you know, when they swallow a hook and people cut the line and then they fly off, and then days or weeks later, they can't eat, they have secondary infection. So please reel the bird in, throw a towel or blanket over it, put it in a box. Once the bird's secure, cut the line. It's so kind, and we'll do the rest. Just put it in a box and get it to us, and we will do the rest. Do not cut the line and let them fly away. This bird was lucky. He must have just swallowed this hook because everything was clean. He was fat. He was angry. Surgically removed it, and he was released. And now you guys know when someone says to you, why do you rehab gulls? They're everywhere. They're trash birds. There's no better time to learn about a species than when they're abundant. So on that note, I hope that this presentation was informative, and I hope also it has empowered you to understand that we all can make a difference. I just gave you some bullet points of some simple actions that will help you to help wildlife and reduce impacts on them. And so I like this quote. Sorry to quote myself, that's tacky, but I think it's really true, that only through our conscious efforts to reduce our large footprint can we pave the way for their smaller ones and ultimately pave the way towards a healthier planet. It is so very true. And I also hope that the next time you see that darned squirrel in your backyard, that you will think of it as a furry forest regenerator and not just a pest. They're also beautiful. I think they're really darn cute. This is an eastern gray squirrel. And finally, as Rebecca mentioned, we are a nonprofit and we rely on your support. So any donation you can make, even $5 buys us a bottle of Pedialyte. And almost every animal we see, except for the turtles, gets Pedialyte as a hydration solution when they come through our door. And I think I'm just going to see, I feel like I lost Rebecca. Admin.
I'm here.
Oh, yay, okay, I couldn't see you anymore. And on that note, I just want to say thank you all for attending. I hope this was informative, interesting, fun, and I hope you get some good takeaways from this.
Yes, thank you everyone for attending. We do have a little chat going at the bottom. If you want to ask Stephanie any questions, I can relay them to her. I did mention our virtual baby shower at the beginning of this, but for anybody that logged on after that, you'll be seeing some information going out on the 27th of June. We are going to be holding a wild baby shower. Normally we would do this open house style and you would be able to interact with us a little bit more at Wild Care, but with the state of the world and COVID, we are being very cautious about the health of not only our patients, but also our volunteers and our staff members, and also our supporters. So while we are going to hold a baby shower and ask people to give us gifts for our wild babies, we are going to be doing that, having people drop off in our parking lot. We will be having a raffle. So when you arrive, we'll take your email and we'll announce on Facebook some updates to some of our patient care. So you'll be able to see that live on Facebook, some of our current inpatients getting fed or cleaned, or an update on sort of their before and after as they're progressing through their rehab process. And then at the end of our baby shower, we'll be holding a raffle, and one lucky, amazing supporter will win a great gift basket. So with that being said, I'm going to toggle to some questions and also some thank yous. Loretta, FC, Lawrence, and Laura Lisco. I'll say thank you. So thank you guys for joining us today. I'm glad that you enjoyed this. We are also big fans of you, all of you.
Yes.
H says she has a groundhog, or many. She thinks she might have a whole family. How does she coexist with groundhogs and have a garden too?
Yeah. Groundhogs are tough ones because they're absolute masterminds for digging. And so I would say a garden. I think you would need to probably bury, I'm not sure. I don't get a lot of groundhog questions. I would think you would need to probably bury some fencing several feet deep to try to discourage them from digging under and in. But again, they are masterminds at digging. I think I'm going to have to ask my staff if they have any techniques for deterring them. So if you can leave your email, I will email you some tips.
And I don't know if this helps, but when I was young, my grandparents had an awesome garden in their backyard, but they lived on the marsh, and they had an entire family as well that lived in their woodpile. And so what they ended up ultimately doing, because they couldn't deter them, was they created a garden for the groundhogs, like 3 of their favorite foods or something, and then they stopped eating the food for the people. I don't know if that helps, but it might.
I love that idea.
Yeah, they were very generous people. So that looks like it for the questions. If anyone has any follow-up questions that they think of, because if you're anything like me, tomorrow morning in the shower, you're going to think to yourself, oh shoot, I should have asked. You can email me. My email is events@wildcarecapecod.org, and it will pass on your questions to Stephanie, and we will get back to you at our earliest convenience. But keep in mind, it is baby season, and she is feeding that mouse pup every 2 hours. So we do answer emails as quickly as we can. So thank you all so much. Susan, I see your email. Thank you so much. We will get back to you in the answer as soon as we have it. And I hope everyone enjoyed this. Thank you so much. If you haven't signed up for Thursday already, Galapagos is going to be really, really great. And we do have a few spots open for that still. We hope to see you then and in the weeks to come.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
Definitely.
Bye.
Thank you.
Fun.